So without further ado, let's have the first finalist, Emily Pierce, to come up here to give her presentation. She's a student from Biological Sciences, and presentation title is The War and Peace of Cheese.
Right now, growing on and inside of you are millions of microbes. These microbes grow together in diverse communities, which we call microbiomes. Microbiomes are like tiny neighborhoods made up of bacteria and fungi. These neighborhoods exist almost everywhere on Earth, including the human body, where they can impact your immune system and even your mental health. We're starting to understand a lot about microbiomes and why they're so important. But one thing we don't know a lot about is how do organisms in these communities interact with their neighbors. The human microbiome is like a big city, teeming with diverse types of microbes. Just like it's hard for you to get to know your neighbors in a big city, it's challenging for scientists like me to understand connections between organisms in these complicated systems. Instead, I've turned to a simpler community, more like a small country town. This community comes from the rind of cheese. Cheese is actually an edible ecosystem made up of bacterial and fungal members. Rather than thousands of species, there are more like 10. This makes it a great model for us to understand more complicated systems. In my research, I study how bacteria and fungi interact with their neighbors. Sometimes you have a great neighbor who's willing to bring you a cup of sugar when you're running low. And in this case, you might love your neighborhood and stay there for years. On the other hand, you could have an awful neighbor who plays loud music at all hours of the night and keeps you awake. And in this case, you might want to move out after a couple of months. These same types of interactions take place on cheese, where organisms can either stimulate or inhibit their neighbors. Here, I'm showing an example of a bad neighbor that I found on cheese. This yellow bacteria is not able to grow anywhere close to the white fungus. What makes this fungus such a bad neighbor? One possible answer is that this fungus is producing an antibiotic, or something that kills bacteria. Fungi are known to produce a range of antibiotic compounds. For example, penicillin was originally isolated from a fungus. Finding a potential antibiotic on cheese was really exciting because antibiotic resistance is one of the major public health challenges of our time. Each year in the US, 2 million people get an antibiotic-resistant infection and 23,000 die. It's therefore crucial that we find novel antibiotics, and cheese could represent a previously untapped source of these. Although the original purpose of my research was to try to understand the basic principles of how bacteria and fungi interact in communities, this basic research has led me to potentially finding a novel antibiotic on cheese that kills major disease-causing organisms like E. coli. Here on the left, I'm showing you healthy E. coli cells. On the right, you see E. coli cells that are being killed by the antibiotic I've isolated from a cheese fungus. These cells become swollen and eventually die. I'm in the process of characterizing this antibiotic as a potentially novel compound that could be used in the future to treat human disease. Hopefully today, I've convinced you that microbiomes matter, that we can use cheese to study them, and that these findings are not just relevant to cheese, but can provide public health solutions. Thank you.
So thank you, Emily. Okay, all right. So I have to go up here too. So, thank you very much, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation that teach us about the human microbiome and also cheese.
Cheese, yeah, exactly.
So we just have a few questions for you. What is your favorite food and why?
Well, I mean, obviously mac and cheese is a great choice. But
yes.
I'm also
Anything else beyond that?
I also love cake. I really like baking, and so cake is one of my, my favorite
Wonderful,
foods.
yeah. So beyond food, what is something fun on your bucket list?
So something that I've always wanted to do is go swimming with otters. I love animals, and there's actually a sanctuary nearby where you can go and swim with the otters, so I think that would be totally amazing.
Thank you. And what is your favorite spot for vacation?
My favorite spot for vacation? I would have to say probably Switzerland. I did a study abroad when I was doing my master's degree there, and I loved it. I'm also a rock climber, so they have lots of great climbing opportunities and great cheese, as you know. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Let's keep her. Yeah. And, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.